It's lovely to see you. It feels like ages. We're just going to have a kind of a conversation really about what you've done during your life, both within the Air Force and outside of the Air Force. So you've done some fairly interesting things in that time. But could we start with with one of your current roles, which I was just fascinated about, which is the Department of Transport, I think, have made you one of a very small group of aviation ambassadors. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was, first of all, hello everybody, and thank you for having me as well. It's a real treat to do something a bit different to my normal day of playing with my 4-year-old and dinosaur games and things. So thank you for releasing me from that for a short period of time. And I also just wanted to point out, because I'm on furlough at the minute, I can't talk about the Blades much at all. I can't be seen to be promoting them or working for them at the minute.
Sure, we'll miss that bit out.
We're going to talk lots
about
all
knows that you're on the Blades. There we go.
I'm done. Perfect. Yeah, the Aviation Ambassador thing was really exciting. So I got approached the summer last year, or end of the summer last year, and the Department for Transport were looking to develop a group of people really to try and sort of encourage people to join aviation in all of its many forms. So not just pilots. It's important that we're trying to cover engineers, and there's some amazing stat about there's a couple of hundred people involved in the process to get one aircraft flying at any one time. So that might be 1 or 2 pilots, but behind that there's, you know, all sorts of ground handlers, air traffic control, you know, if you look at the airports, or the baggage handlers and stuff. So it's really to encourage people to go for a career in aviation, but also to try and open it up a bit and make it more diverse and inclusive for everyone. So they've picked people who, obviously being female, I got sort of picked for that reason, I guess, but also because people would recognize me, I think. But there's about 8 or 9 of us now from really diverse backgrounds. So there's a lady, for example, who used to work on an airport in Ghana. And she literally cleared trees and bushes, but wanted to be a pilot. She ended up doing engineering work because the airport out there recognised she had a really interesting way of thinking about problems and solving problems, and they thought, you know, she's got an engineer's brain. So they then gave her training, and then she also became a pilot. She now lives in the UK with her husband and does some phenomenal work encouraging schools to get kids from more disadvantaged backgrounds into flying and into aviation. And of course, because they've got an engineering workshop, they can have kids in there with spanners and really and they're actually building an aircraft with kids, and it's amazing. So it's kind of a great way to open up lots of different aspects of flying. So there's glider pilots, I've taught there's engineers, Jo Salter, who was the first female fast jet pilot, who was my kind of mentor, or someone I really looked up to, a role model.
Just for everyone listening, Jo is going to come on to Project Entertain. We're just trying to fix the date with Jo.
Oh, brilliant.
Really nice to talk to her as well.
Yeah, really interesting story, actually. So yeah, it's a really good opportunity to do stuff like that, but also then to take it that one step further and try and get a bit more involved in policy for general aviation as well. So it's I was really honoured to be asked, actually, and I'm personally finding it rewarding going down and chatting to the other aviation ambassadors, because everybody got into aviation in such different ways, that I'm finding that fascinating, as well as actually getting out there and being able to talk to schools and various other projects.
Fabulous. Well, can we take you then from the present day right back to the beginning? And of course, you come from an RAF background, don't you?
Yeah, so my dad was in the Air Force. He's retired now. He was a navigator. So the point at which I was aware of that, I guess, he used to fly Vulcans, and we lived up in Lincolnshire, and then he went on to Buccaneers, and we moved out to Germany, and then he came back onto Tornadoes, and we all moved back into the UK. So yeah, I moved around the Air Force a little bit, quite lucky though in some respects, because I pretty much lived in Lincolnshire my whole childhood, and Dad sort of commuted around us apart from a few years in Germany.
So was it your father that inspired you to join the Air Force? Was it genetic, or is it what's your thinking on how
I have to admit, I don't think Dad was I don't think it's what Dad had in mind for me, put it that way. I do remember him once saying to me, "Oh, can't you do something useful with your life?" Which I thought was quite funny, since he'd had it as a career for himself. But no, I think it I used to get at air shows. I quite enjoyed it. Wasn't too fussed either way until I was about 11 or 12, and I went through. Before that, I'd gone through, I want to be a vet, I want to be a teacher like my mum and stuff. And then when I was 11 or 12, I started spending some of my summer holidays at RAF Marham specifically with Dad on the squadron, because obviously Mum and Dad were working and I was on holiday. And I loved being on the squadron. I loved the camaraderie, the team / family feel about it all, and I loved helping Dad plan the navs or the routes for his missions. So I would be in the planning room, they'd call me the new baby navigator. I helped him plan the routes, and then him and the guys would go off, fly it. I would sit in there in the control tower, watch them take off, watch them land, and I just loved being part of that whole atmosphere and family. And that was when the real seed was sort of planted, and I was like, I think I'd like to do this. But of course back then you couldn't have female fast jet pilots. So I thought, okay, I'll join the Air Force and then sort of see, that will be my aim, to get into the Air Force, and then I'll see if I could be a pilot and maybe just fly something different. And then pretty quickly after that they started letting females be fast jet pilots, and I, in my lovely naive way, went, oh well, great, I'll do that then, I'll be a fast jet pilot.
And what route did you take then in at that point? Did you go to, I know there's a load of cadets on the call, I can see, so were you an Air Cadet? Did you?
No, so I wanted to be an Air Cadet. I went to because we lived in Lincolnshire and Dad kind of moved around us apart from when we went to Germany, and on the Tornado at the time, obviously there were squadrons in the UK and squadrons in Germany. So I was actually at a boarding school, a weekly boarder, and my school couldn't really facilitate me getting to the Air Cadet, so that wasn't an option for me. They didn't have a CCF at my school. I tried to start one, and it was just too big a jump for them. It was an all-girls school at the time, although I have to say now they have an amazing CCF at the school. So I wasn't able to get into stuff like that. So what I did do is I made a connection with a recruiting group captain, and he essentially dealt with me a bit like as if I'd gone to a careers office, and I applied for a flying scholarship. So that was my first sort of point at which I knew that I could actually do something and get some experience at the interview process and a bit of exposure to the Air Force.
And was that that flying scholarship, was that your sort of first hands-on flying experience?
Yeah, because that was the other funny thing, is I didn't get that till I was 16. So I'd done like 3-4 years by then of wanting to be a pilot in the Air Force with no idea at all whether I was even going to be any good at flying. So I'd read a lot about aptitude tests. I looked at how I might improve myself. So anything that involved hand-eye coordination, I jumped on. I had one of those, I don't know if you've ever seen one, there's like a wooden board and it's like a maze, but there's holes everywhere and there's a little ball, and then you've got two little controls and you try and get the ball around. I did lots of things like that just to try and make sure that my hand-eye coordination was as good as it could be before I went for the aptitude test. But yeah, it was a relief to go flying and think, well, at least I can do this bit. I might get harder later on, but I could do this bit.
And clearly you were an absolute expert nav as well by that point.
Yes.
The
There's a lot of banter between my dad and myself about piloting.
And has that banter continued actually while you're talking about that?
Oh yeah, it was quite funny actually, because my dad used to tell me jokes when I was younger that were sort of navigator anti-pilot jokes, if you like, about how slow pilots are, or whatever the joke was. And when I joined the Air Force, it was only then that I realized they were all traditional pilots versus navigator jokes, and my dad had just switched over. It was quite
had the whole repertoire the wrong way round, or the right way round.
Exactly.
Amazing. So just sort of closing off, talking about family and your dad. Obviously your dad was also, we had John Peters on a few weeks ago. Your dad was also a fellow POW, wasn't he, during the Gulf War?
Yeah, he was.
That affects your view of whether you wanted to join the Air Force. How old were you at that point?
So I was 13 when that happened, and I wanted to join the Air Force probably for about a year or two by then. And you're right, it was an interesting time. I mean, obviously it was a horrific time actually to live through, and that side of it, but it definitely made me question what I really wanted to do in my life. But there are two things really came out of it, I think. One is that it really made me think about the serious side of the job that I had picked for myself. We all like to, in our heads, remember the flying through the Lake District and flying low level. It's amazing in a fast jet. But actually there is a very serious side to it, and you have to be prepared for that. Now, I consider myself lucky in that respect because it forced me to think about it. When I went through training, there were definitely people as we got further and further through the training who hadn't really thought about it, and it was either a bit of a shock. We had a few people drop out because they suddenly realized they couldn't drop bonds on people necessarily. It wasn't for them. So it was good for me because it made me really think about it very hard. And also I had the truth. I knew what actually happened to Dad when he was a POW. I knew what he'd had to think about and what he'd had to cope with. So I wasn't reading rumours or what in my own head what I thought it might be like. I knew what it was like. So I could use that as I could use that for my advantage, I think, is the way to look at it. And it gave me real motivation to do it as well, I think. But you're right, there was definitely during the period I didn't think about my career, wasn't bothered about that kind of stuff at that stage. But afterwards I probably had another 6 months of really thinking carefully about it and then thinking, no, I still want to do this.
Yeah. And at quite an interesting age 13, old enough to absolutely to be able to think through all of those, the issues surrounding it as well.
Yeah, and again, it's something I remember, or I try and remind myself of now, is it, okay, I was 13 and you kind of think, well, that's pretty young actually to deal with something that was pretty traumatic, but you'd be amazed. It's very easy as an adult, I think, to forget how much you see the world through different eyes as a 13-year-old, but it's still very real. And you probably understand more than a lot of adults maybe give you credit for. So I think it's something, a lesson that I've taken forward is, don't ever disregard a younger person's view or opinion, because you don't know where they're coming at it from, and it's they're very real feelings and very real thoughts as well, and then can be very serious. So
fast forwarding 3 years, then you've done your flying scholarship. What happens next?
So then I applied to the Air Force, and I think this is the beginning of what, if you read my biog, I joined the Air Force, I did this, that, the other, and it all reads very nicely, and you think, oh wow. And I think this is true of lots of people who are in the public eyes. It always makes it look like you just sort of arrived there and you just did it and it was relatively easy. There were loads of hurdles in the way, and the first one was when I was 18, I applied to the Air Force, and they told me to go away, and they said, yeah, you're not going to make it in the Air Force. On paper, of course, I'd been to an all-girls private school, boarding school as well at that. I hadn't done Air Cadets, I hadn't done CCF. All the sports and stuff that I'd done were provided by my school, so I hadn't really been able to demonstrate that I had this great motivation. So they told me to go away. And I was like, oh, that's not part of the plan. That's not what I want. So I had a really good think, and I already enjoyed maths and physics a lot, and wanted to do engineering at university. I decided I wanted to have a degree, so I had something else to fall back on if it turned out I wasn't a very good pilot after all. And so I decided to pick the hardest degree course I could find to show the Air Force that I had what it takes, I had motivation, and I wanted to go to a big city. So I went to London. So I ended up studying aeronautical engineering at Imperial College. And I hate to say it, but some of that was just to prove a point to the Air Force. I want to do this, and I can cope, because I knew I could cope in a male-dominated world, but of course on paper it looked like I maybe wouldn't. So then I went to university, and that was really tough. It was a really tough degree course. Yeah, there was definitely a point in my second year I thought, why did I do this? This is terrible. It was really hard work. It was the hardest I've ever had to work, I think. I was lucky at school. I sort of was in the exam mindset. I could understand what exams were ever going to ask for me. I was able to prepare well for them. And then university was a real tough time for me. But when I went back to the Air Force, they did then say, well, okay, you've maybe shown some motivation. We're a bit more interested in you now.
And I guess it's about motivation, but it's that also seeing a bit more of the world maybe before you go into the Air Force. Was part thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even now when I look back, I actually, I went from a boarding school to university to the Air Force, all of which are very big institutions, and I guess that suits my character. That has suited my character for a long time, until at the end of my commission, when I was actually, I'm ready for a change now. I'm ready to go and see a slightly different side of the world. But you're right, it is. I think it was good to go out and just see something else. So relatively grateful that the Air Force didn't really want me at 18.
You're not still bearing a grudge very much.
Not too much, no. I let them off that a while ago.
So you went back and they said, yay, join us.
So yes, they did, yes. And then the next hurdle, well, in fact, there were 2 hurdles with this one. I got some sponsorship when I was in university. So my final year, I was sponsored.
This is on, you were on a university air squadron at that time?
That's right. Yeah, I was on the university air squadron, which was amazing. And I did part of my flying training on that, which is very different nowadays, but yeah, it was amazing. But yeah, it turns out that my so I don't know if you can see this, but the measurement from the back of my shoulder here to the fingertip here is 2 millimeters too short for the, or was, should I say, 2 millimeters too short for the entry requirements.
Ooh.
I mean, 2 millimeters is nothing, and obviously, you know, if I got measured first thing in the morning when my arms were cold, you can only reach so far if you swing your arm around a bit. So that had happened previously. So I actually bought a pull-up bar, which I put in a doorway of my accommodation, and I hung from it on a daily basis to try and lengthen my kind of ligaments and stuff in my shoulders, just to give me literally another couple of millimeters. Yeah, and it worked, and Yay. I was like 2 millimeters into, you know, the correct side of the limit. So that was one. And then the second one was when I finally finished my degree. Then you do a medical before you then actually go to officer training. And I went to the medical and they said, oh, your eyesight has deteriorated, which I'd kind of been aware of in my final year at uni. I was aware that I was getting a bit short-sighted. And they said, unfortunately, because you're not already in the Air Force, that's it. You can't be a pilot now. So I left this medical. I'm like, oh my God, after all of this, now I can't do it. And luckily, and this is such a fluke, because of the type of sponsorship I had in my final year, I already basically had a commission. So I was already technically in the Air Force, and therefore I could continue as a pilot. If I hadn't had that sponsorship, I wouldn't have been a pilot. It's just
blimey.
Yeah.
So a bit of a roller coaster ride then over 3 years prior to joining the Air Force, and then you arrive and go straight into IoT. And I've asked the same question. I think I asked Gary Waterford, Jay Mayhew, asked John Peters how they found IoT. How was it for you at that point? And in fact, at that point, in terms of the kind of gender balance, I mean, things are very different now, but at that point, what was the gender balance on IoT? Can you remember?
On my flight, there was a flight of 8 or 10 of us. I'm just thinking there were 4 girls.
Okay, so pretty even.
Yeah, it was. And I don't recall feeling that there were. I remember feeling like I stood out a bit because there weren't many other female pilots. There were, luckily, but not many of us. But yeah, I don't recall feeling at all as a minority. And I loved IoT. We've always been brought up as a bit of an outdoorsy type person, and out in the hills, and IoT was just a lot of running around with pine poles outside. It was just amazing.
So no moments of during IoT that you thought, I just can't do this?
I remember one leadership exercise that we did where I was the leader and I had misunderstood something in the instructions. It was a piece of equipment and the idea was you were meant to go and get the equipment, bring it back, and then take a measurement of a direction or something. And what I did was send a team off to go and read the instrument, then in situ, and then come back. And they came back and they're like, we're really confused. And I basically misunderstood some of the instructions, which kind of meant my lead had been a bit of a fail. And I was quite frustrated at that. But overall, I just had a great time. It was just right up my street. It was good fun.
So after IoT then, you've obviously, so at that point, had you already been streamed fast jet?
In those days, you got streamed whilst you're at officer training. So I got streamed towards the back end of the course and I got fast jets because I'd already done all of my elementary flying training whilst on the University Air Squadron.
So you went straight then to where at that point?
I went to Linton, straight to Linton onto the Tucano, which was so exciting because obviously previously all my flying I've been doing in my spare time around my degree. It didn't make my degree much easier, but so weekends and odd days during the week and things, and to suddenly arrive at Linton and you watch the takeoffs and you're like, there's so fast. It's going to be amazing flying this. And just to be there full time, you know, that was now my job, and to be on a course and all of that stuff. I wanted to join the Air Force in the first place. The professional kind of challenge of it, or the personal challenge of it, but also the camaraderie, being on that family that, you know, was your course. It was just brilliant. It was exactly why I joined. So I was, very happy at Linton.
And how long were you at Linton for?
Probably about a year overall, I think. Yeah.
And you found it, because you'd obviously done all your elementary flying training already, you kind of had you had a knowledge of your own aptitude. You found that relatively okay?
Yeah, I kind of I was lucky from my earlier training. I knew where my strengths were. I knew I loved planning and then flying low level trips. That was definitely my forte. I'd done some formation and I really enjoyed it and seemed to be okay at it. And the only bit that really cropped up for me at Linton, which is now slightly ironic, was doing the aerobatics. Doing loops and the basic stuff is fine, but as soon as you started trying to do wine glasses and double noddies and stuff, I never really understood what was happening to the aircraft. So I learnt just what I had to do. It was very mechanical. I knew I had to look up, pull up, look over here, check that, do this with my feet, then do this. So I think it was all probably quite agricultural, which is slightly ironic now, bearing in mind my country. I think some of it may have been a slight lack of confidence with the aircraft, and I don't quite sure what I'm doing to it. So I'm just a little bit more, by number almost with it. But yeah, no, it was a good course.
So obviously I'm kind of getting the sense up till now you had a fairly decent plan about how you from an early age you wanted to get into the Air Force. You took various measures to fit you for the Air Force. You then had to adjust that plan slightly as you went along. So you'd got to your point of joining the Air Force and you're now flying training. Did you already have the next stages of your plan, your aspiration for a plan in your head? I mean, were you at Linton thinking I really want to fly Tornado, or did you have that kind of level
I really wanted to be a Jaguar pilot. Okay. So when I was on the University Air Squadron, they used to do summer vacation attachments, SVAs, and you spend a week on maybe a station or a squadron. And I'd gone up to Lossiemouth for a week, and I'd spent the majority of the time on the Jaguar squadron up there, on the OCU, and also been over to 15 Squadron to the Tornado one as well. And I loved the feel of the Jaguar squadron. I got to fly in a Jaguar low level through Scotland, which is such a standout ride. It was incredible. Still got the maps from the trip in my memorabilia box, and I loved it. And I thought I could feel that I would fit into that world. So that's absolutely what I was aiming for, to be a Jaguar pilot. Yeah.
So then straight to Leeming. No hold, straight through?
No, so I went to Valley.
Sorry, I'm Leeming. I meant Valley. Bring at you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I did have to hold, but it was nothing like the worst times have been. So I can never whinge about my holding. I think I had 4 months between Valley and Linton, and in fact I held on a Harrier squadron deliberately because I wanted to. I don't know if there's going to be any ex-Harrier pilots listening to this.
Just be polite, Kirsty. Be polite.
I had heard that there were rumours about the Harrier squadrons being quite aggressive and potentially places that I wouldn't fit in. But this was all rumour, and I thought I need to find this out myself. So I spent 4 months on 3 Squadron and had an amazing time. Went on board HMS Illustrious as well in the Channel, and really got to see what being a Harrier pilot was like. So that was great as background information for me to know actually it wasn't really quite the place that everybody made out to be. It was tough. Didn't quite have the same feel as a Jaguar squadron, but I wasn't going to turn down a Harrier slot if one came along. So yeah, went to Valley and I did the first squadron there, which was called 208 at the time, which was all of the advanced flying training on the Hawk, and got to fly a fast jet for the first time.
And how was it?
It was brilliant. Flying low level again was what I just loved doing. So low level trips in the Hawk were amazing, and I have a really standout memory of going solo in the Hawk on a Friday afternoon, and it was glorious weather. So it must have been spring or summer or something, not a cloud in the sky, and there must have been 5 of us going solo in the same afternoon. And on previous aircraft, when you go solo, you're basically allowed to do a circuit or a couple of circuits, land, and that's it. And the Hawk, you go solo, you get to go away and do some aerobatics and then come back. So you feel really privileged and kind of grown up, if you like. And I remember doing my aerobatics on the Claim Peninsula, and you know, sort of upside down, and I could look and see 4 other people doing their solo aerobatics, thinking this is amazing. And then obviously I went to the bar for happy hour afterwards. It was a real standout day for me.
And so then what was your final destiny in terms of
well, as I kind of hope I'm kind of revealing, is that, you know, your path never takes the course that you wanted it to take, and I got creamed off, which means I became an instructor. So before I went to the front line, I became an instructor on the Hawk, teaching students the course I had literally just been taught myself. And that delay meant that by the time I popped out the other end, the Jaguar was no longer in service. And well, it certainly wasn't taking any new pilots. So yeah, everything had to be rethought slightly. And I got sent to the Tornado GR4, which was obviously low-level heaven, so couldn't have been happier.
And just talking about your years as a creamie, do you think that really helped your future career as well? I mean, it's really interesting the way the Air Force does that. They take people who've gone straight through the course, and then you know, those challenges are perhaps fresh in their mind to teach to others. I think that's quite fascinating. I've always found that quite interesting.
Yeah, it's great because the psychology, and it's changed form really over the years. There was a period where they didn't have any creamies for a while, and they've started doing it again now. But when I was there, we were really lucky. The idea is that you're mixing people who have just done the course and are very fresh on just the pure academic stuff. And the course we're teaching is quite an academic course, not the tactical side of it. And you're mixing with guys who are coming back from the front line who have got all the tactical stuff and operational information and thoughts, and that's what they want to impart on the students. But of course, that stage of the course, you still really just need academic stuff. So it was a really good way of meshing those two different attitudes. It was great for us as creamies because we're surrounded by frontline guys who just want to dit on about all their experiences on the front line all day long. So it was brilliant for us to be exposed to that. But also as a first tour or a first job, you know, by the end of it, I was leading 3-ship detachments to overnight detachments up to Lossiemouth, leading pairs low level around Scotland, around Wales, you know, leading solo students around Scotland, Wales at low level. It was, you know, the responsibility you get given was, looking back, quite remarkable actually.
Do you think that when you then got posted obviously to the Tornado OCU, so Operational Conversion Unit, for anyone who's less familiar with all of the 3-letter abbreviations, do you think that kind of actually gave you a bit of a leg up compared to some of the others who hadn't done that creamie experience because you had a lot more under your belt?
I think you're just in a slightly different place. My tactical knowledge was no better than anybody else's because I'd still only done the same amount of training in tactical flying as they'd done. But my airmanship and overall flying ability was probably at a higher level just because I'd got away, I almost got 1,000 hours by that point. So I was, experienced on the Hawk in particular and that kind of flying. I do remember when I went to the OCU though, my arrival interview, I was sat down and told in no certain terms that just because I was a creamie didn't mean anything. I was back to being a student and you are to behave and do exactly what you're told. And I think there was I think I was one of the first creamies to go to the Tornado. There was a bit of a concern, I think, that I was going to arrive and be all like, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. And obviously when you're learning a new aircraft, you're too busy learning a new aircraft to be walking around with too much attitude. So it gave me an advantage in that I could I'd been out of the training system for a little while, so I got that nice perspective back again on what real life's about, because obviously it's really high pressure flying every day, and every day could be it shouldn't be an immediate chop ride, but every day your career is kind of on the balance, and it is wearing. It really is when you're flying training is drawn out over many years, which it is sometimes. So having that breather in the middle was probably really good for my confidence.
So I don't want to bang on too much about gender because I think so many people are just completely gender blind, and goodness knows now in the Air Force it's very different than it was 5, 10, 20, etc. years ago. But was it a factor at all during your flying training and coming on to your flying career?
I get asked that a lot. I can hand on heart say, within the Air Force, I've never had any sense of being either given advantage by being, because I'm female, or for it being harder for me by being female. I think because the job is so all-encompassing when you're flying, that kind of stuff goes out the window because you're just busy doing the job. You know, through training and on the front line, you just, you know, you're putting all your effort into that, and you don't have too much effort for anything else on that front. So I have to honestly say that. Having said that, whenever some media came to Valley, you know, and they saw me in the background, oh, we must interview her, can we interview who is she, you know, and that's a really difficult line to play, because obviously the I've got a real thing at the minute, or now, that I realise that the only way to encourage other girls to do it is if they see other girls doing it. You know, it's just, you've got to make things seem accessible. I joined the Air Force because my dad was in it. I spent time around it, and I realised it's not some great sort of thing up here that's just almost impossible to get into. It's completely possible to get into it, and I kind of knew that because I've grown up around it, and that's kind of what I'm keen to still do. So the Air Force are in a really difficult place because they need to promote the girls who are doing this kind of stuff, just so that other girls realise it's completely possible to do whatever you want to do if you want to do it. But on the other hand, if you're constantly being seen to just push the girls, then it seems one-sided. There was definitely a point where if you looked at any interviews or anything from Valley, you'd think I was the only student pilot going through Valley at the time, you know. And I don't think there's any correct answer, that you just have to balance it, I think. So yeah, from a media point of view, I felt very conscious of being female.
So you'd almost say that it was more of a media and public perception, yes, as opposed to actual reality within the Air Force.
Absolutely, yeah. Within the Air Force, I was a pilot, and then I was an officer. Oh, and third, I was a girl.
Did you ever feel some sort of additional pressure because you felt like it was your duty to do the media interviews when you were asked to do them? Different women that I've worked with in the Air Force have different views on. Some are like, no, I don't want to be treated as special. Some others perhaps understand that it's helping, exactly as you said, making it more accessible and more achievable for others.
I think you have to find what's right for you. I didn't feel anything I did put me under too much pressure, and I was always keen. There were times when I'd say, you know, they'd ask me to do an interview or something, and it used to annoy some of the guys on my course. They were like, well, we've done the same thing, why aren't we being interviewed? So I would often say, hey, actually, you know, Chiz or someone else, he's way better at this than I am, why don't you interview him? He's got a really good story to tell as well. And I could sort of do that a bit, but I'd never put myself in a place where the pressure was too much in that respect. So let's not do anything, put it that way.
No. Okay. So let's talk about then the step up from, how did it feel, the step up from Hawk to Tornado?
Yeah, it's really interesting because up to that point, in the fast jet training, you're taught to be a single seat pilot. Basically, you have to do everything yourself. There is no assistance. And then you rock up onto the Tornado, and then navigator appears, and there's two of you to do everything. Which can be amazing and it can be terrible depending on how well you work together, like any small team. And I was given, through the operational conversion unit, my navigator that they kind of pair you up, was a French exchange guy. So that was hilarious because this guy's got loads of experience on the Mirage, and his English was pretty good but very heavily accented, so when it got stressed it was really difficult to understand what he was saying, but we had a lot of fun going through the course together. And yeah, it was fascinating now being on an aircraft where you could actually, the tactics weren't just academic tactics, they were real tactics, and we were really starting to learn stuff and using the radar and going down to the bombing range. You know, it was brilliant. Yeah, really, really exciting times. And flying in Scotland was, you know, such a great place to be flying the Tornado around. And
your love for low level enduring throughout your career?
Absolutely, yeah. Always has done and always will. I think it's still my favourite thing to do. Although I have to say, air-to-air refuelling the Tornado OCU was the first time I did air-to-air tanking, and that was quite a special moment as well. It's something unlike anything else you've ever done.
Thank you so much to Kirsty for giving up her time to join us on Project Entertain. To hear Kirsty's interview in full and learn more about her time on the Red Arrows in the Royal Air Force and her illustrious flying career since, please visit our website and click on the Project Entertain area.